Good evening, and thank you for joining me tonight on this special session of Bibliotherapy Live, which has a theme this evening of going outdoors with literature. What is the literature that takes you outdoors? So I hope you're well equipped for this evening's session. Hopefully you might have a torch with you. You might be wearing your hiking boots. I hope you've got some water to hand and some kind of snacks or sustenance in case we get lost on the mountainside with Nan Shepherd or any of the other people that we're going to be talking about. I'd love to know, what are your favourite reads for taking you outside? Are there any books that you read in your childhood, for instance, that made you yearn to run away and live on the side of a mountain? Or are there books that you read as a teenager or in your 20s or adulthood that sent you onto unknown peregrinations with perhaps even different animals by your side? I'm going to be talking about some of these this evening. And if you have any comments or thoughts on these, please send them to me either here on Instagram or Facebook, or you can also send me an email to ella@ellabeartoo.com, and I will get back to you on those comments later. Part of the bibliotherapy sessions idea here on Damien Barr's Literary Salon page is that I would love you to send me any questions that you have or ideas relating to bibliotherapy generally. So do send those questions in, as well as anything relating particularly to tonight's topic, reading the outdoors. And thanks, people that have joined me already. I'm getting some great comments already. David suggested The Railway Children as a brilliant book for taking you outdoors. I completely agree. That's an absolute classic. And I seem to remember that most of that book actually takes place outside. Kerry mentions Tove Jansson, who is one of my absolute favourite authors, Neil Ansell and John D. Burns, who are all inspiring you right now. Great to hear. And hello, Ollie, and all the lovely people that are joining me on Facebook and Instagram this evening. It's great to see you again. So I'm going to start by sharing with you some of my favourite books, both fiction and non-fiction, that have inspired me to go outside in search of new adventures. One of my absolute all-time favourites is My Side of the Mountain by Jean Craighead George, which is an absolutely classic childhood book written in 1959, but it's one that's always been read and much beloved, particularly in America, which is where Jean Craighead George came from. She actually published more than 80 novels, so she was a very prolific writer. And these were her most famous and successful. There's actually sequels, 2 sequels after this book. And this book is about a boy called Sam Gribley who goes off, leaving his flat in New York where he lives with his 8 brothers and sisters, I think. And he's desperate to have some time on his own. He tells his parents he's going to go and live on the side of a mountain, and that's what he does. He goes off into the wilderness and makes himself a home inside a hemlock tree, and he trains a peregrine falcon to be his companion and his aid in catching creatures to eat. So he does have a highly successful time. I'll read you a couple of little passages from it to give you a flavour of the book. I left New York in May. I had a penknife, a ball of cord, an axe, and $40, which I had saved from selling magazine subscriptions. I also had some flint and steel, which I'd bought at a Chinese store in the city. The man in the store had showed me how to use it. He'd also given me a little purse to put it in and some tinder to catch the sparks. He'd told me that if I ran out of tinder, I should burn cloth and use the charred ashes. I thanked him and said, "This is the kind of thing I'm not going to forget." I hitched rides into the Catskill Mountains. At about 4 o'clock, a truck driver and I passed through a beautiful, dark hemlock forest, and I said to him, "This is as far as I'm going." He looked all around and said, "You live here?" "No," I said. "I'm running away from home." How many of us have wanted to do that and gone to live in a forest in the middle of nowhere? How many of us have tried to do it and failed? And how many of us have succeeded? I'd love to hear any of your stories. Jean Craighead George is such an inspiration, and so many people have ended up believing in Sam Gribley and going off to look for his house in the tree, which he carved out of his hemlock tree. I'll just read you a tiny bit more because it's so good. And thanks, Jacqueline, for telling me that you're loving to hear her reading. I wonder if there's any recordings of her reading her book. That's an interesting idea. So this is from quite near the beginning of the book, and it says, "In which I hole up in a snowstorm. I'm on my mountain in a tree home that people have passed without ever knowing that I'm here. The house is a hemlock tree, 6 feet in diameter, and must be as old as the mountain itself. I came upon it last summer and dug and burned it out until I made a snug cave in the tree that I now call home. My bed is on the right as you enter and is made of ash slats and covered with deerskin. On the left is a small fireplace about knee high. It is of clay and stones. It has a chimney that leads the smoke out through a knot hole. I chipped out 3 other knot holes to let fresh air in. The air coming in is bitter cold. It must be below 0 outside, and yet I can sit here inside my tree and write with bare hands. The fire is small too. It doesn't take much fire to warm the tree room. It's the 4th of December, I think. It may be the 5th. I'm not sure because I've not recently counted the notches in my aspen hole that is my calendar. I've been just too busy gathering nuts and berries, smoking venison fish and small game to keep up with the exact date. The lamp I'm writing by is deer fat, poured into a turtle shell with a strip of my old city trousers for a wig. It snowed all day yesterday and today. I have not been outside since the storm began, and I'm bored for the first time since I ran away from home 8 months ago to live on the land. You get an idea from this little section of what kind of character Sam Gribley is. And Jacqueline, thanks for saying that my accent is lovely. I'm sure it's very different to the accent it's meant to be read in. But I completely fell in love with Sam Gribley. He's such a lovely character. He is very funny, and he has a lot of great thoughts and comments about the animals and creatures that he lives with, talking about his falcon, the peregrine, who he calls frightful because of the way that he found her at the top of a tree, which was a frightful experience for him. He says, "When I awoke, my eyes opened on 2 grey eyes in a white strubly head. Small pin feathers were sticking out of the strubly down, like feathers in an Indian quiver. The big blue beak curled down in a snarl and up in a smile. 'Oh, frightful,' I said. 'You are a raving beauty.'" I just love the way that he talks to his animals. He also has a weasel that lives very nearby, and he spends a lot of his time worrying about whether the weasel is okay. And he gets through a very, very cold winter where he has to actually break his way out of his hemlock tree in order to escape from this kind of chamber of ice that he's been stuck in. It's incredibly vivid, and it is a book that really does make you want to rush out and go and live on the side of a mountain all on your own in a tree. And one of the things that I love about it is that it's a story where the parents give their complete consent to what he's doing, which seems pretty surprising as he's only 12 when he goes off on his adventure. But it's all in all a highly positive and lovely book, which I recommend to everyone of all ages. It's actually a book that I give to people quite frequently for bibliotherapy purposes, because it's a book that takes you out of the hurly-burly of life into a world of nature, into a place of solitude. And that's one of the things that I want to think about tonight, is books that take you into nature and take you into places of solitude and why we love them. So thanks for more people that are joining me, and thank you, Jacqueline, for enjoying my reading. I will be reading from quite a few more books, giving you little flavours of them tonight here on Damien Barr's Literary Salon. We would have been pre-lockdown in the Savoy Hotel, and with Damien I've been working as his in-house bibliotherapist over the years in many different places, and I've had the joy of traveling with him to remote islands in the Caribbean, working on reading weekends and reading weeks. And with Damien, I love to take the joy of bibliotherapy out into the world. So it's lovely to have you guys with me here this evening, thinking about the literature that takes us outdoors. One of my favourite other books, which is actually a little bit on the same lines of My Side of the Mountain, is Cares by Barry Hines, which is an English book written originally in 1968, which describes a working class boy who takes on a kestrel as his pet, and through living with this kestrel and training the kestrel to be his companion, he actually joins he gets so much more out of life and begins to join in with the world in a way that he previously couldn't do, because he's very much from a poor background and is highly deprived and actually has a really tragic home life. And Cares, also known as A Kestrel for a Knave, is an absolutely brilliant book. And it's interesting that two of my favourite outdoor books star birds. And it actually seems to be a common theme in the world of outdoor literature that birds can be highly important. And the book that I wanted to discuss next is a very beautiful new book, which is just out here in the UK, by Charlie Gilmore, called Featherhood. By the way, people joining in now, I will put all of the book titles up on a separate post at the end of the session or tomorrow morning, so that if anyone misses the titles, you'll get a chance to catch up with them. So don't worry if you've missed something. So Featherhood by Charlie Gilmore is an absolutely beautiful, wonderfully written memoir all about the author's experience of thinking about fatherhood and also living with a magpie. So this is another book that deals very closely with a bird, and there have been quite a few amazing memoirs which talk about birds, including H is for Hawk, which I'm sure many of you will be familiar with. And this book, Featherhood, is a remarkably unusual tale in which the author describes his own strange relationship with his biological father, whose name was Heathcote Williams, and also his relationship with the father who brought him up, David Gilmore. And Charlie Gilmore talks about these relationships through the lens of his relationship with a magpie, which comes to him by accident when his wife's sister picks up a magpie one day who is lying in the street looking broken and battered, and brings the magpie into the house and their family start to look after this bird. And Charlie at first has no idea what he's doing in terms of looking after a bird, and he finds it a very alien experience. But during this experience, he also realizes that his biological father, Heathcote Williams, also had a very intense and long relationship with a bird that was a jackdaw. So Charlie goes through many revelations while he begins to take on this magpie, and he finds it very difficult to compare himself with his biological father, with whom he had a very complex and not entirely positive relationship, because Heathcote Williams effectively abandoned him when he was a baby. So I'm going to read you a couple of extracts from this book. And I must say, before I read them, I loved absolutely everything about this book, from the very clever title, I love that featherhood, fatherhood idea, to the names of the different sections of the book, which are all based on things relating to magpies and the bird. So the different sections are called pin feathers, flight feathers, blood feathers, nest, and egg, which does also give you a clue as to the potential trajectory of the book. And it's so beautifully written that it does read very much like a novel, full of wonderful metaphors, and it's beautifully pared down, because I think it's one of those books that could have had a huge amount of extra information, but he's managed to pack it all into quite a short space. So here's a little extract to give you a flavour. In the 2 weeks it's been with us, the magpie has grown into quite a handsome fellow. There's something princely in the way it struts about the bed in its cape of black silk and snowy ermine fur, its nascent flight feathers flashing like jewels. Both Jana and I have started to think of the magpie as a male. We have nothing of real substance to base this on. Magpies, like most members of the crow family, are impossible to sex on sight, as they possess no outwardly visible genitalia and do not display any particular difference in size or plumage either. But the bird has to be one or the other, and we've got a 50% chance of being right. Beak glinting, the bird makes another lunge for my septum. This time I duck beneath the covers, feeling like a giant as he pads around on the duvet above me, talons pressing down, as light as kittens' paws. Isn't that a fantastic image? You can really imagine the bird climbing over Charlie, the writer, as he's hiding under the duvet and feeling the magpie's little feet as light as kittens' paws. As I get up to prepare the magpie's first meal of the day, I think again about Heathcote and his bird. Moments like this morning, moments that seem like echoes transmitted across generations, are a little unsettling. Anything that makes it seem as if I'm following in Heathcote's footsteps sets alarm bells ringing. The last time I went chasing after his shadow, it led me to a breakdown of my own, and these days I have a terror of repetition. Sanity sometimes seems like a very thin membrane, through which it would be all too easy to fall again. I have to remind myself that there's nothing to fear here, a harmless, if wildly improbable, coincidence. Before I can change my mind, I write a quick email to Heathcote, attaching a photo of the magpie standing proudly on my chest, exactly as Jack Daw did to him 30 years before. You can tell by the way that Charlie's writing and what he's saying about sanity sometimes feeling like a very thin membrane, that he has had mental health problems in the past, and that his father has too. And much of this book is Charlie's worries that something could happen to send him back into an unhappy mental state. And we see through the book, which is very delicately revealed and written, that he is explaining the things that happened to him in his childhood and how they've affected him later on. So the book is a slow revelation about Charlie and his father, and also about his relationship with the bird. And I love the way that he reveals facts about the bird and thoughts about birds generally. And this is one of the reasons that it's a book that makes you want to go outside, because with these revelations about different species, it makes you feel like you've got to get outside and see these species and how they can interact with us. So I'll read you a little bit more to give you a glimpse of that. Between feedings, I've been reading around the subject as much as I can. That's the subject of birds. As well as Heathcote's poem, I've been hungrily absorbing books written by people who've had encounters with this family of birds and by biologists who have studied them. The things I've discovered are astounding. Magpies are one of the few animals, other than humans, that have been shown to recognize themselves in mirrors, implying that they are self-aware. They play, practice deception, are masters of imitation. I read more, learning about the tiny miracle of the corvine mind, how crows and their ilk have some of the highest brain to body ratios in the animal kingdom, how these brains are folded densely in on themselves like Japanese steel, which allows them to punch way above their cerebral weight. Bird brain, it seems, isn't such an insult after all. I read that magpies are roughly as clever as toddlers, and that other members of the corvid family are even smarter. The New Caledonian crow, for instance, has been shown to possess reasoning powers equal to a 7-year-old child. Striking though it is, the comparison with human intelligence seems wrong. This roving pecking creature is not a semi-developed human stuck in a bird's body. He is an entity all of his own, a totally different intelligence that is developing in front of us. There's one more little bit that I want to read, which is one of the moments that felt like an absolute revelation in the book. As the bird quests and pokes around the room, interrogating the things he comes across, my laptop charger, a cactus, a pair of sunglasses, with his increasingly powerful beak, I wonder how it is that I've come this far in life without having noticed the personhood, for want of a better word, of these animals. I realise that if I've thought about them at all in the past, it's been as mere decorations, flashes of black and white that occasionally shoot prettily across the sky. The mental transformation feels almost magical, like walking out into your garden and finding the flowers deep in conversation with one another. For me, that's a real Alice in Wonderland moment when Charlie talks about realizing that these birds, magpies, have their own personalities and their very different ways of behaving with each other and with humans. And the way he says it's like walking into a garden, finding the flowers talking to each other, that is an Alice in Wonderland image. But it's really interesting the way you realize that this bird turned Charlie's entire perception of the animal kingdom on its head for him, and thereby for us, because we as readers get to experience that secondhand. I deeply recommend this book to anyone who's interested in any kind of nature and also in fatherhood, because it's a really lovely book pondering the nature of relationships with parents. And Charlie, in the book, you'll also be delighted to hear, starts thinking about becoming a father himself. And that's one of the lovely and difficult scenarios for him, and his relationship with the bird that he's looking after in the same way that he might look after a baby is also very profound, and very profound in the way that he thinks about his own relationship with his parents, both biological and adopted, and also with any potential children that he might have. So That's a fantastic book, which I've only very recently read. Charlie Gilmore, the author of that novel, does pay a debt in his acknowledgements to this fabulous author, Robert Macfarlane, who is one of the most fabulous nature writers that we have living in the UK currently. He's written many absolutely fabulous books, which I'm sure many of you will have heard of, such as Underland, which is all about the places under the ground where people don't normally go, such as caves, natural formations of rock under the earth, underwater, water bodies, and so on. He's also written The Wild Places, The Old Ways, and he has written this absolutely gorgeous book, The Lost Words, which he wrote with the absolutely gorgeous and wonderful Jackie Morris. So this is a book which has been an absolutely enormous success in the UK and possibly very likely traveling around the world as well, which is wonderfully illustrated by Jackie Morris, who's an absolutely gorgeous artist. And it's all about the words of our English language that could be lost due to them not being used so frequently by the modern generations, because Robert Macfarlane believes that we're becoming disconnected from nature. So this book is an absolute call to young people and their parents as well, to go forth into the world of nature and discover all these creatures and insects and plants that people might have forgotten about. So he's got a page, for instance, on the kingfisher, there's one on the fern, there's one on the starling, and it's full of really wonderful words, poems, images, and ideas. So this book, The Lost Words, it's actually a book for all ages. It's not just for children. It's in the format that would imply that it might be a children's book, and it's very large, as you can see, but it's actually a book that people of all ages are going to appreciate and love, because it's so gorgeously illustrated and the words are incredibly playful. And this is the thing about Robert Macfarlane, is that he does love to play with words. And this book, Holloway, is again extremely beautifully illustrated, and it's a celebration of the Holloway, which I will describe to you in Robert Macfarlane's words, because he writes it much more beautifully than I would describe it. Holloway, the hollow way, a sunken path, a deep and shady lane, a route that centuries of footfall, hoof hit, wheel roll, and rain run have harrowed into the land. A track worn down by the traffic of ages and the fretting. I just lost where I was. A track worn down by the traffic of ages and the fretting of water, and in places reduced 16 or 18 feet beneath the level of the fields. Holloways do not exist on the unyielding rock regions of the archipelago, where the paths stay high, riding the hard surface of the land. But where the stone is soft, marmstone, greensand, sandstone, chalk, there are many to be found, some of them more ravines than roads. They are landmarks that speak of habit rather than of suddenness, like creases in the hand or the wear on the stone sill of a doorstep or a stair. They are the result of repeated human actions. Their age chastens without crushing. They relate to other old paths and tracks in the landscape, ways that still connect place to place and person to person. Greenways, droveways, stanways, stoweys, bradways, whiteways, redaways, radways, rudways, halsways, roundsways, trods, footpaths, field paths, lays, dykes, drongs, sarns, snickets, fossils, shoots, driftways, litchways, sandways, ridings, halter paths, cartways, carnies, causeways, here paths, and also fearways, dangerways, coffin paths, corpseways, and ghostways. Robert Macfarlane is always a wonderfully inspiring writer, and in this book he goes out to find the holloways that he originally went searching for with Roger Deakin, his friend, who was also an amazing nature writer and who sadly died. And Robert Macfarlane wrote this book really in memory of Roger Deakin, a great friend of his. And it's also inspired partly by a novel called Rogue Male, which was written by Geoffrey Household in 1939, which was a kind of spy thriller, and it's a fantastic book, which I'd very much recommend, in which the hero goes to hide in a holloway. And originally, Robert Macfarlane and Roger Deakin went to search for that very holloway where the rogue male was hiding. And this is a absolutely gorgeously inspiring book, which makes you want to dive into these lovely, beautiful pictures, which are absolutely fantastically drawn. And it makes you actually feel as if you are enclosed by those holloways yourself. And I've known many a reader who, after reading this, has then gone in search of these beautiful places. And they can still be found all over the country. And if you do go to them, you might be able to hide in them, sleep the night, and nestle into those holloways, possibly reading a book while you're there. So I also wonder if any of you have favourite books that you like to read while you are outside. I think that's something for another session that I will talk about, because I think books that you read when you are outside are different to the books that you read in order to be inspired to go outside. You may disagree with that thought, but I think often when you are outside reading, for one thing, you might just be reading the book that you happen to be gripped by, which is absolutely to be encouraged. Many a night I've spent camping reading a thriller under the covers, which has absolutely nothing to do with the place that I'm in. But there are some books that you might want to read in the places that you're going to. And this book, The Living Mountain by Nan Shepherd, is one of the most beautiful books about nature in the English language, according to The Guardian. Jeanette Winterson says of this book, reading The Living Mountain seems to me to explain why reading is so important and odd and necessary and not like anything else. There is no substitute for reading. Couldn't agree with you more there, Jeanette. Thanks for that fantastic summary. The Living Mountain is a unique and strange and wondrous book written by a unique and strange and wondrous woman, Nan Shepherd, in the 1940s. And it's all about a particular place, the Cairngorms, which are mountains in Scotland. And I must admit, I've never been there, but I feel in a way as if I have after reading this book. It is a book that also says you will be changed after reading this book. And I must admit, I do feel like I have been changed by reading this book. There's something about the way that Nan Shepherd describes the Cairngorm Mountains that makes you feel completely differently about mountains. It makes you feel as if the mountains are alive and that they have something deep inside them that we humans can connect with. I'm going to read you a little bit from the book that might give you a hint of how Nan Shepherd describes the beauty of the mountains. and how they make her feel. To walk out through the top of the cloud is good. Once or twice, I've had the luck to stand on a tip of ground and see a pearled and lustrous plain stretch out to the horizons. Far off, another peak lifts like a small island from the smother. It is like the morning of creation. Once on Loch Nagar, we had watched the dawn light strike the Cairngorms, like the blue bloom on plums. Each scarp and gully was translucent, no smallest detail blurred. A pure, clear sun poured into each recess, but looking south, we caught our breath. For the world had vanished. There was nothing there but an immense stretch of hummocked snow. Or was it sea? It gleamed and washed the high hills as the sea washes rock, and came to an end, as most seas do somewhere, with the Glen Lyon Mountains, Ben Lawers, and Schiehallion standing up out of it like one of the long twin-peaked islands of the West. A sea of mist invading the heart of the land, but sucked up by the sun as the hot day went on. I love that simile with the blue skin of a plum. It's really beautiful. And Nan Shepherd writes about water in a way that no one else ever has, in my experience. She talks about it in a very spiritual and very profound way. And I'll read you a little bit to show you how ineffable Nan Shepherd is when she talks about water. The freezing of running water is another mystery. The strong white stuff whose power I have felt in swollen streams, which I have watched pour over ledges in endless ease, is itself held unpunished. But the struggle between frost and the force in running water is not quickly over. The battle fluctuates, and at the point of fluctuation between the motion in water and the immobility of frost, strange and beautiful forms are evolved. Until I spent a whole midwinter day wandering from one burn to another watching them, I had no idea how many fantastic shapes the freezing of running water took. In each whirl and spike, one catches the moment of equilibrium between two elemental forces. The first time I really looked at this shaping process was in the Slugane Valley on a January day. The temperature in Braemar village had fallen the previous night to -2 degrees F. We had climbed Morone in the afternoon and seen sunset and the rise of a full moon together over a world that was completely white, except for some clumps of firwood that looked completely black. The intense frost, the cloudless sky, the white world, the setting sun and the rising moon, as we gazed on them from the slope of Morone, melted into a prismatic radiation of blue, helio, mauve and rose. The full moon floated up into green light, and as the rose and violet hues spread over snow and sky, the colour seemed to live its own life, to have body and resilience, as though we were not looking at it, but were inside its substance. I won't go on because there's so much that one wants to keep reading from this book. You could actually just read the whole thing aloud. There are incredible descriptions of pine needles that have been whirled into fantastic shapes by the water and then frozen into a strange and intricate knot and then been defrosted and turned into a wonderful sculpture. By the way, apologies to anyone for my terrible Scottish accent and lack of ability to do the Scottish names to any Scots that are watching tonight. But Nan Shepherd is someone very definitely to read. The Living Mountain, absolutely incredible book, very short, but a book to keep returning to again and again. And it absolutely makes you want to go not just to the Cairngorms, but also to any mountain that's near you and to experience it in all sorts of weather. It makes you want to go out on freezing cold nights in the middle of the night. Go out now if you can into a mountain. don't blame me though if things go wrong. Make sure you take your torch and your Kendall mint cake to see you through the night. Always make sure you've got some water as well. And take Nan Shepherd with you, because she does have lots of sensible thoughts. And she also doesn't shy away from telling you about the things that have gone wrong. There's quite a few sad tales in that book of people that died on the slopes of the mountains. So be careful if you do go out. So, moving on from Scotland, I would now like to make a leap to Africa and talk about the very brilliant writer, whose name I'm probably going to pronounce wrong, Rudyard Kapuscinski, who wrote many amazing books which are non-fiction, but they read like novels. And some people have accused him of actually writing fiction rather than the truth, because his books are very, very colourful and possibly not entirely accurate, but they are absolutely gripping, beautifully written, very much inspiring to make you want to go to the places that he writes about, and also completely fascinating politically. So Rudyard Kapuscinski was a Polish journalist who spent 27 years traveling around Africa and writing about the continent's recent past, featuring disturbing accounts of civil wars in Liberia, the origins of the Rwandan genocide, and the roots of the recurring famines in Africa. He was someone that didn't shy away from traveling deep into the countryside and getting into all kinds of trouble, and then writing about that in the most picaresque ways. He was a roving journalist, and he was actually nearly killed 4 times. He kept transgressing against the international laws and disappearing without trace, throwing himself into the jungle, floating down the River Niger in a dugout, and wandering through the Sahara with nomads. So he was one of the most crazy journalists, a bit of a rogue male himself. And at one point in 1966 in Nigeria, he was driving along a road where they say no white man can come back alive. He says, I was driving to see if a white man could, because I had to experience everything for myself. He had a compulsion to witness the worst and the best of humanity, and he was frequently ordered by his bosses in the Polish press agency to put an end to these exploits that could end in tragedy. But he refused to ever stop. And he, as a result, wrote many absolutely compelling books about different countries. The Shadow of the Sun was all about his adventures in Africa, in Uganda, and the Serengeti. And I'll just read you a little extract to give you a sense of what his writing is like when he writes about Africa. It's all improbable, incredible, as if one were witnessing the birth of the world, that precise moment when the earth and the sky already exist, as do water, plants, and wild animals, but not yet Adam and Eve. They have no maps, they're lost, and they're confronted with an enormous herd, stretching almost to the horizon, of buffalo. They press on regardless. It gets hotter and hotter. The burning air started to quiver and undulate. And at that point, Kapuscinski begins to hallucinate. He's practically half dead by the time he ends this passage. And when he collapses, he actually lands on an enormous Egyptian cobra, at which point he freezes, and his friend slams down an enormous metal canister on the snake. Kapuscinski hurls himself on the canister as well, whereupon the entire hut that they are both in explodes with the snake going absolutely crazy. He says, I never suspected there could be so much power within a single creature, such terrifying, monstrous, cosmic power. Eventually, the cobra dies and they do make it to Kampala. And Kapuscinski is completely delirious, not just from heat stroke, but also from malaria, as it turns out. And he gets a form of cerebral malaria, which he then ends up also having to be in hospital with for several weeks and having TB. So Kapuscinski is a bit of a kind of macho writer who has been, as I said earlier, accused of being a little bit free with the truth of his experiences, but he does write in order to be an absolutely to attain a brilliant read for the reader. And all of his books do give you a very vivid flavor of the places that he's been. He wrote The Shah of Shahs, all about Iran and the Ayatollah. He also wrote many other travel books, which are completely fascinating. And if you haven't discovered him already, I would absolutely recommend that he's someone to read who will make you want to get out there as well into the outside world, possibly not being quite so insane as he was. But he is one of those writers that makes me feel like adventures are the stuff of life. And just to bring us back to some childhood reads that made me personally feel in the same way, the Just So stories by Rudyard Kipling are also stories which have an amazing vividness to them and make you feel like you ought to get out there and discover the great greasy banks of the Limpopo River if you haven't done that already. I've just seen a comment from David saying that Estelle recommends The Man Who Planted Trees by Jean Giorno, which I agree is a classic book, which I absolutely love, which is all about a man who comes back from the war and who, in order to deal with his really post-traumatic stress, he begins to plant acorns so that trees will grow up out of the battered land that's been destroyed by war. And that's a really beautiful book, and very much one that makes you want to get your fingers in the soil and get out there into the outside world. Now, I did promise when I was advertising tonight that I would talk about Thomas Hardy, and I'm realizing that time is going too fast. So I won't read anything out from him, but I just wanted to mention that he is one of the most fabulous writers about nature. And in Tess of the D'Urbervilles, there are two of my favorite passages which are about the dawn, which make you want to witness the dawn. And not everyone in our modern world is up at dawn every day. In the days that Thomas Hardy is describing, people were much more in touch with the beginning and the end of the day. And there may be people who are farmers who are still up with the dawn and down with the dusk. But we often only encounter the dawn in literature. But if you read Tess of the D'Urbervilles again, there are two absolutely gorgeous passages. One is when Tess is with Angel Claire, she's falling in love with him, and they're getting up at dawn to milk the cows. And it's a highly romantic, very saturated passage full of sexual tension and desire. And there's another passage about the dawn which is set in the dead of winter, when the snow starts creeping in under the doorway and creating little cones and pyramids of snow. And after Tess witnesses these cones coming in, she knows that she's got to go outside and work outside in the freezing dawn. But both of those passages are ones that make you want to witness the dawn yourself. And I would highly recommend any of you to read Thomas Hardy and then go out the next morning watch the dawn and look at those grey half tones of light that then turn into saturated colour gradually. And if you're of an artistic persuasion, you might want to try and capture that with a sketch or a painting. Some other wonderful books that take you out into the world of nature are books that talk about going on massive walks. So we have Rachel Joyce's The Unlikely Pilgrimage of Harold Fry, which is a book in which our hero, Harold Fry, spontaneously decides to deliver a postcard to his long lost love, who lives 630 or so miles away. And he goes on a journey wearing inappropriate shoes and with no coat and no money on a very, very long walk. And this adventure is a little bit like the Canterbury Tales, as he meets so many fascinating people on his way. And it's a spontaneous walk, which is also rather like another recent book called The Salt Path by Raina Wynn, which describes the long, long walk of a couple who go on the southwest coastal path as a slightly spontaneous escape from their debtors and the end of their life as they know it, because everything's gone wrong in their life. I won't tell you too much about it because I know that time is running out tonight, but it is a book that makes you think about the positivity of going one footstep after another on a very, very long walk, and how that can be a life-changing experience. And I wonder if any of you have done such a thing. That's also a book that makes me think of one of my all-time favourite books that I like to prescribe to people very frequently, which is called The Year of the Hare by Arto Pasolina, who is a Finnish author. Now, this is a cult book in both Finland and France, and it's been translated into many other languages as well. It's a picaresque novel which describes a middle-aged man who is completely fed up with his life, his wife, and his job. And the book starts off with him going off on an assignment with his journalist friend. The hero, who's called Vatanen, is a photographer, and they accidentally hit a small leveret, a young hare, and our hero Vatanen gets out of the car when they hit this hare accidentally, picks up the hare, scoops it up, and spontaneously decides to go off into the wilderness with the hare and embark on a long journey into the wilderness. And it's a very strange and unusual novel, but I feel that it's full of wonderful, positive ideas. It makes you, in a way, want to drop everything yourself and take off with a small furry creature and go on a big adventure. It's a book in which the hero says goodbye to all the meaningless aspects of his life and takes on far more magical and brilliant things. But the hare is not in any way a magical creature. It is simply a hare. And that's one of the things that I totally love about the book. It's not magical realism. It does have a tiny element of that, perhaps, at the end of the book, but it is told in a very realistic way. It's very funny. It has a lot of Finnish humour in it. It describes how Vatanen nurses the hare back to health, quits his job, leaves his wife, sells his boat in order to make some money to go off on his travel, and forms a deep connection with the hare. And he is completely liberated by this touch with nature. It's a book which I feel is one which gives you, the reader, a sense of liberation. And that's why I love to recommend it to people so frequently. And it's one that I think can spur people into making new decisions about their lives. I wonder if any of you have had experiences like that. Do tell me if so. I'm not saying that all of you should drop everything and go off into the wilderness by any means, but perhaps you might feel inspired to, at the very least, go on a big walk or a big adventure in nature this weekend, maybe even sleeping overnight and perhaps interacting with some of the natural elements that you meet on the way, whether it's a bird, whether it's a small furry animal, whether it might be a dog that travels along with you, or anything else that you might encounter. So do tell me and get back to me if you do any of those things. I will post the names of the books that I've been talking about later this evening. And I would love to hear about any ailments that you might want to share with me. Do send me an email at ellabear2, sorry, it's ella@ellabear2.com, or drop me a message on Twitter, Facebook, or Instagram. And I will be coming back next month onto Damien Barr's Literary Salon Facebook page and Instagram to talk about ghostly stories because it's going to be Halloween. So I'm very much looking forward to that. That's going to be a spooky event, and I hope that you'll be able to join me there. Meanwhile, I will also be doing weekly bibliotherapy live sessions on my own Facebook page. That's Ella Bear too. So join me there in the meantime. And thank you very much for coming this evening. And I'll see you next time. Good night.